Welcome to Optimal Equestrian, a podcast where I dive into how to optimize ourselves, our horses, and our businesses. Please support the show by following or subscribing to my channel and follow me on Instagram at Optimal Equestrian. Make sure to share the show with anyone who you think might enjoy it or benefit. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome to episode 12. Today I'm talking all about cold water immersion. And I didn't really want to talk about cold water without also talking about Wim Hof. He's known for his cold water and breathwork methods. So I'm combining those two in one episode so you can have it all under one podcast to reference. So today we're going to cover Wim Hof's life and what drove him to discover the benefits of his cold water exposure, breath work, and meditation. And then I'm going to tell you a couple of his methods, and we're going to also go into the science behind cold exposure, the recommended temperatures, duration, and timing, like when to do it, as well as my own experience with it. If you've followed me on Instagram, then I'm sure you've seen that I cold plunge almost daily. So that's what is in store for today. So let's go ahead and jump into Wim Hof's life. So Wim Hof, if you don't know who he is a world record holder, which includes all sorts of things from running a half marathon above the Arctic Circle while barefoot, wearing only shorts. And then he also ran a full marathon through an African desert without ever drinking water. He swam under a thick layer of ice for more than 200 feet. And he also stood packed in ice for hours without letting his core body temperature drop. At one point, his body temperature dropped to 88 degrees, but then he was able to raise it 12 degrees with only his mind. And the science before that had stated that if your body temperature dropped below 90 degrees, that you would stop shivering, which is your body's natural reaction to warm you up, and it would eventually spiral down until you died unless there was some sort of external heat source applied. And there was no external heat source. He didn't die. He was actually able to raise it. And so all of these things that he accomplished are just crazy to even try to attempt, let alone succeed in. So how did he get here? Well, Wim Hof was born as a twin and before ultrasounds. So his mother was unaware that she was carrying two babies. His brother Andre was born, and then afterwards, his mother kept saying that, like, to the doctors that she was feeling these strange contractions. Again, they're unaware that there's a second baby in there. So the doctors were just dismissing it, told her that they would go away, that she was fine. But she was adamant and confident that something wasn't right. And so she just kept voicing these concerns. And finally, they intervened just in time to save him as he was suffocating. He grew up in the Netherlands, and as a child, he always loved spending time in nature. He would play Tarzan or build forts. And then he just started to become a vegetarian. And by age 12, he was into yoga, Hinduism, Buddhism. He just was always fascinated with nature and this discovery of himself. And I just thought that was fascinating and different from any kids I knew growing up, and that he was just interested in those things at such a young age. There were also two incidences as a kid where he got hypothermia. Luckily, both times he was found and someone was able to warm him up. But he describes getting hypothermia as being so cold that you begin to get this warm sensation that comes over your body. And he just felt tired and wanted to fall asleep. And he just said it was very peaceful. So then as he's growing up, he eventually gets a paper route. And he said that taught him a lot of discipline, that delivering newspapers on the hills and in any kind of weather made him stronger, both physically and mentally, as well as the fact that he was up at 3:30 and alone in the world before everyone else was awake. So then as an adult, he gets married. They have 4 children, and his wife was struggling with depression, and she eventually committed suicide by jumping off the 8th floor of their building after kissing her kids goodnight. So Wim Hof was now alone with their 4 children, and he wanted to find an alternative to the pharmaceutical options that his wife had been given to battle these mental illnesses. And that's what really started leading him into discovering the breath work and the cold exposure. So he originally started developing, testing, and exploring the cold and his breathwork methods. He, at one point, was a squatter, and that's where he really was developing this stuff. There was a lake nearby, and he would venture out into the cold water, or if there was snow on the ground, he would go out in the snow all night naked. And he just was talking about all these like sensations and feelings that he was getting. It was helping his mood and all these different things. And so that's how we really started developing and realizing the benefits of the cold water therapy and breath work. So he really nailed his methods down and started teaching it to other people. And a lot of the benefits that they saw was having more energy, they had less stress, improved immune system, they could sleep better, they had increased cognitive and athletic performance, it boosted their mood, they lost weight, it could alleviate anxiety, and all of this with just the power of your own mind and in just a few days. And he would replicate this over and over again. And he has a lot of examples in his book. People who have embraced his method have reversed their diabetes, their rheumatoid arthritis, MS, and a myriad of other autoimmune illnesses from lupus to Lyme disease. A lot of researchers have looked to him and his students to study the method. Eliza Eppel is doing a study on the Wim Hof method and its effect on emotional reactivity, autonomic stress, reactivity, and cellular indicators of aging. There's also some small studies that have already been done showing improvement of the immune system response to endotoxins and inflammatory arthritis of the spine, which is suggesting that it can reduce inflammation and symptoms in the arthritis in the spine. And it's being tested with people with spinal cord injuries who can't easily activate their autonomic and cardiovascular system with exercise. So cold water therapy has been shown to work the cardiovascular system by causing stress, which causes your heart rate to increase, which sends a signal to the body to release adrenaline and cortisol, which then sets off a series of biochemical processes that exhaust your adrenal axis, your energy, because you're in poor vascular condition. So then your heart needs to now pump more and work harder. And so once you train your vascular system, you can begin to go into the cold water without feeling it. And I wish I would have tested this when I first started. It's a little late now, but he says that within 10 days, your heart rate will decrease by 15 to 30 beats per minute, which is going to, over time, be less stress on your body. But the cardiovascular needs to be worked out. And if you can't, like what he was saying with the people with the spinal cord injuries, if you can't do that, then this is a great way to do it. But the tiny muscles in your veins and arteries help pump the blood around. And when we put on clothes or stay in our climate controlled environment, or we're not actively going out getting cardiovascular exercise, then those muscles get weak. As far as his breathwork students, the doctors were studying them, and they saw that a lot of them had oxygen saturation numbers around 50%, which is normally where people die. And these people could go minutes without breathing. So they knew that somehow his students had changed their own biochemistry. Wim Hof was also trying to help people with some disorders like Crohn's disease, cancer, depression, arthritis, asthma, or bipolar. And he noticed that all those are caused by deregulation of our immune, endocrine, and hormonal systems through uncontrolled inflammation throughout the body. And so he assumed that simple breathing techniques could suppress inflammatory markers in the blood. And that would help us to be able to regulate our mood, emotions, body temperature, and much more. Doctors were starting to notice that a lot of these functions were controlled by the vagus nerve. And so Dr. Kevin Tracy wanted to conduct an experiment to see if Wim Hof was influencing his vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is related to a lot of inflammation. And so they started taking blood from Wim Hof and hooking them up to heart and lung monitors. And then they would tell him to just sit there and meditate. And Wim Hof started just doing his breathing exercises, and he would frequently go 2 minutes without breathing. And the heart rate monitor kept registering him as dead, like he was just flatlining. So while he was holding his breath, they would take more blood to see if it was actually affecting his vagus nerve. And they ended up testing over 307 biomarkers. And the results show that he was, in fact, controlling the vagus nerve, which means that it's making a huge impact on inflammation. And we can now use this to affect or help cure or manage symptoms of all these diseases. There was another interesting study that they did on exposure to E. coli. During one study, he was packed in ice for an 80-minute session, and he was trying to show that he could increase his metabolic rate by up to 300%. Well, his blood also showed no reaction when exposed to a bacteria that was known to cause violent reactions when it met the immune cells. So they decided to try and test this by exposing him to E. coli to see if his method could actually suppress the inflammatory markers that are caused by the E. coli bacteria. And so they did the study and found that he was, in fact, suppressing the inflammatory markers interleukin 6 and interleukin 8. And this is typically only done with expensive injections. They thought that maybe he was just an anomaly, and in order to have the science back it up, they needed to make it repeatable on other people. So Wim Hof trained a panel of 12 males in just 4 days, and they replicated this study, and none of them had any symptoms from the E. coli injections. They also showed that they were suppressing the interleukin 6 and interleukin 8 and boosting interleukin 10. So that means that anybody who has these diseases where the inflammation response just goes out of control and overreacts, that his method could be helpful to them. So, what are his methods? The first one I want to share is his protocol for cold exposure for beginners. And this is an easy way to start in the shower, so it's economical. You don't have to buy any extra things, and just test the water, see how it makes you feel, and if you can keep it up before buying either a bunch of ice or going the expensive route and getting the actual cold plunges and whatnot. So Wim Hof suggests when you're just starting cold water exposure to start in the shower. And he says for the first week, just to do 30 seconds of cold water at the end of the shower. He says it's okay to start with just 15 if you can't get to 30, but try to start at 30 if you can. Week 2, bump it up to 1 minute. Week 3, a minute and a half. Week 4, 2 minutes. And continue that until you get to a minimum of 3 minutes. And then he suggests doing it at least 5 times a week. But the benefits for cold water really begin at around 60 degrees. I wouldn't really obsess over the actual temperature of the water at first. Just turn it all the way to cold. If you really can't handle that, then either drop the time down, like you said, to 15 seconds, or maybe bump the degree up a little bit. But you're going to notice you're going to have more energy right after. Your heart rate should decrease, like he said. And then you're going to have improved blood flow. It's going to deliver better nutrition and nutrients to your cells. You won't get sick anymore because you're going to boost that immune system, and you're just not going to, your body's not going to be as vulnerable as before cold water exposure. So that's a great beginnings place to see just how you handle it, how it makes you feel, and begin experimenting. And then if you get really bold, fill your bathtub up with water, throw some ice in there, put a thermometer in there, make sure that it's below 60 degrees. And that will be way more difficult. As far as his breathing techniques go, I'm just going to share with you his basic breathing exercise. He does have a variety of them that he gives in his book. And They vary for all different uses from meditation, pain relief, mood regulation, endurance exercise, other athletic performance, or stress relief. He even claims that they cure hangovers. I haven't tried it. That would be an interesting one. But his basic breathing exercise, he says to just sit in a safe place where you're not going to get hurt if you pass out, which don't be worried, you probably won't. But make sure you're have enough room, feel comfortable. You can expand your lungs freely without any constriction. So then you're going to close your eyes, clear your mind, and start just being conscious about your breath. You're going to take 30 to 40 deep breaths in through the nose and then out through the mouth if that feels more natural. But he suggests doing just in and out through the nose. But you're going to fill up your belly. Think about filling up your belly, your chest, and then all the way up to your head. And don't force the exhale. You should just be able to relax and let the air out fully in and then just letting go of the breath. And he says it's like waves on the beach. And you're just going to find your rhythm, breathing in and out and doing that 30 to 40 times. And then on the last breath, he says to draw the breath in and fill the lungs up to your max capacity without using force, and then relax and let the air out. Hold the breath until you feel the urge to breathe again. And he calls this the retention phase. So then when you feel the urge to breathe, take one deep breath in and hold it for 10 to 15 seconds. And he calls this the recovery breath. And then you're going to let your breath go and start with a new round and repeat that full cycle 3 to 4 times. This does take a while. So make sure you have I think it takes around 20 minutes or so. So once you feel comfortable with that, he says in the second round that when you're on that step where you're going to hold it for 10 to 15 seconds, he says try thinking about squeezing the breath up into your head while you take that recovery breath. He says you do this by tensing your pelvic floor and directing this sense of tension to the core of your body and up to your head, all while keeping the rest of your body relaxed. And he said once you do this, you should feel a sense of pressure in your head, and then you're going to relax and exhale. And he says if you do feel lightheadedness, that is when carbon dioxide is exiting your body and then oxygen is replacing it. And this is all going to make your body more alkaline in the process, and that's part of the magic. So is there actually any science behind cold water immersion? There have been a bunch of studies behind it, but a lot of the science is still debated, as is, I feel like, everything in the health industry. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence as well as a number of randomized controlled studies that support a very broad swath of benefits that are going to include improved immune function, better sleep, improved mood and decreased depression, improved energy, reduced anxiety and stress, improved body composition, improved sexual desire, increased T3, balanced thyroid hormones, increased longevity, reduced inflammation, reduced blood lipids, better temperature regulation, and reduced pain levels, all with no known side effects. There was one study that showed that cold water immersion was an effective recovery tool after high intensity exercise. So it had a positive outcome for muscular power and soreness, and then it decreased creatine kinase in the blood level, which indicates muscle damage. And there's also an increase in perceived recovery after 24 hours post-exercise. It did not help with hypertrophy. So if you are if that's your goal, if hypertrophy is your goal, then you would not want to do it directly after a lifting session. It also showed that the shorter duration and lower temperatures would improve the efficacy of the cold water immersion. So the science shows that there's benefits beginning at 60 degrees all the way down to 45 degrees with a duration anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes. However, I've seen a lot of doctors recommend an ideal time frame of 3 to 5 minutes for most people. But that study was showing that the shorter duration with lower temperatures improved the efficacy. And so the colder you go, the less time you need to spend in it. So if you're doing those ranges that I just gave you at 45 degrees, maybe just stay in for 3 minutes. But if you're doing 60 degrees, stay in it longer. So up to 5 minutes. As far as safety goes, never ever get into body of water without someone else around. You just don't know what's going to happen, how your body's going to react. Also, do not do breath work before or during the cold water immersion. Like any kind of hyperventilation process is not going to go well with water. And that's where you're going to start passing out, and then you're going to be in water, and there's going to be a danger of drowning. You're also going to want to start slow. So for cold water, that would mean start with warmer water because shock is possible. And just as with lifting weights or any other forms of exercise, you're going to need to find the right temperature for you and prioritize your safety in that. And this is not going to, there's a lot of claims that have been made with cold water and like the Wim Hof method, even in my podcast that I've talked about that are in the book and in a lot of the science, but they're not going to replace your doctor visits. And don't discontinue medication if you have one of these diseases or conditions or anything, just because you think that cold water therapy is going to be the one that'll fix it or manage your symptoms. It's just simply going to be a tool that's going to help us perform, recover, and optimize our bodies, but it will not replace medical care. So I wanted to end with my own personal experience with cold water therapy. I started with the cold showers, like I had said. Honestly, I hated it and I wasn't very consistent with the showers. I almost think that they're worse because you go from a nice, warm, like really hot water to that cold is just such a contrast that it was a lot more difficult for me. But once I started filling my bathtub up with water and throwing some ice in it, that's when I really became obsessed with it. And I just wanted to get the water colder and stay in longer. And I wanted to do it every day, but it was a huge pain to do. And it would take forever for the water to cool off. And I would get like my kitchen thermometers to test the water temperature and all that. But I just felt so strong and tough from doing it. And I was just proud of myself, had the energy afterwards. I didn't get sick for, I think, over a year. So, that was just anecdotal for me. I don't know if it was, I wasn't exposed to much, or I was also at the same time changing my diet to eating a lot more healthier food. So it could be all of that stuff. And I had stopped drinking, which also makes a huge impact on your immune system. So then my husband started doing it as well. So we decided we were going to buy a water trough, the horse troughs. I'm sure a lot of you have an extra one just sitting around, but we went and actually bought a designated trough just for cold plunging. And then I got all the fittings and attachments to have a little hose that went off so I could drain the water out. And we got like a skimmer and an actual floating thermometer. And then I bought all these. There's a company, I'll try to think of the name of it, but they basically had these huge ice packs that you would fill with water and freeze them, and then you would put it in the cold plunge. It would take probably close to an hour for them to pull the water down enough for us to get into it. But so every morning I would wake up, I would immediately go throw all those ice packs into the water, and then an hour later we would be plunging, and then I would just refreeze them again. That way you're not having to make ice or buy ice and all that kind of stuff. They weren't, I had to buy a lot of them. I think I had like 20 of them at one point, and then they break really easily when they're frozen. So it wasn't the best system, but we just kept progressing. And then once we were like, okay, we're going to do this consistently, make this a habit in our life. So we shelled out the money for the professional ones with the chillers, and it's on a timer so we can have it set like every morning at 4 a.m. It starts cooling it off to I think we do 47 degrees right now, and you can turn it on Wi-Fi, all that kind of stuff. Very expensive, but we progressed like all the way from shower to a tub to a water trough. And so if you guys are interested in that, I'd be happy to tell you more about each specific one. If you just want to DM me on Instagram, if you're interested in more details. So yeah, now it's just an everyday part of our life, and I am obsessed with it. And I feel weird when we go on vacation and I can't do it. And my husband's even been, I haven't done it yet, but he's been experimenting with doing it at night instead of in the morning. I've always heard that in the morning, doing it first thing is better for your hormones. It helps, like, I don't know, somehow stabilize your hormones or something. But he's been doing it at night, and he says that he sleeps so much better. And I think that has something to do with probably your body temperature needs to drop in order to go to sleep, and then it raises in the morning when you're about to wake up. So I'm sure that that's why it's having an effect on it. So maybe if you have trouble sleeping, I never do. So I haven't really experimented with that part yet. I really like having that first thing in the morning. It really gets me just like afterwards, you want to just move around and warm up. And so it kind of motivates me to like go work out right after or just get ready for the day or be productive around the house, that kind of thing. Oh, I also forgot to mention, so I think I kind of mentioned we like when we started the water trough and then we had the thermometer in there. I started around 55 degrees, I want to say. But your body will quickly adjust to that. And so we just kept dropping it and dropping it. And it got difficult with the ice packs to really get it that low. But now that we have the chiller, I think we started that one around 50 and we've dropped it down. Now we're at around 47. And I like to keep it to where I'm like starting to shiver at the end of it. And I just do 3 minutes at 47. But they say that it helps burn your brown fat, and that will help you like lose weight. And I briefly mentioned that earlier in the benefits, but that's part of the body recomposition part of it, that it specifically targets brown fat because of the shivering. So that's why I like to make sure that I keep dropping the temperature to a point where I start that shivering process, because that shivering is what burns the brown fat. So if that's the benefit that you're looking to get, then I would start around the 60, 55, somewhere around there, keep dropping it. I know some people that do it at like 33 degrees. I think that's insane, and that would probably never ever be me. But right now I'm pretty happy at 47. I still shiver, haven't gotten through the point where I am not shivering through that yet. Or you could always increase the duration until you shiver as well. That's an option. Another interesting point I wanted to talk about was, so I was like becoming obsessed with this cold plunging, and I was sitting there thinking almost everything that I do in my life that is a benefit. I'm like, how can I apply this to my horse or the horse industry? And I was like, well, it's obviously unethical to put my horse in a cold plunge. Like, I wish there was an ethical way to do that. And don't jump on me. I'm not going to do that. It was never thought to do that. It's clearly unethical to do. But it did get me thinking that the whole reason that it's beneficial for us is because we spend our entire lives most of our lives in a climate controlled environment, or we're wearing a lot of clothes, or we wear less clothes. Like we're able to adjust our environment to our specific comfort needs. And so that's made a comfortable life easy. But if we lived out in the elements, then these cold plunges and saunas and all that wouldn't really be necessary, because we would naturally be getting those benefits throughout the year. And so if you think of our horses, I mean, most people's horses are probably dealing with the heat and the cold yearly, and it's probably not an issue. But if your horse is living in a heated barn, or you putting 3 blankets on them in the winter and all that kind of stuff, I do think that it is probably detrimental to their longevity and health, like being as optimal as they can be. I definitely tried in the winter to not blanket my horse. He lives out 24/7. And yeah, I feel bad for him sometimes, but I have to think that that's my own human problem. Like, he is perfectly content without a blanket on. If you put a blanket on him, oh my gosh, that thing is destroyed, or he's trying to rip it off. And so the only time I really feel like I should put a blanket on him is when it's like freezing cold, like really, really cold, and there's rain or snow or some kind of precipitation that's going to affect his hair's ability to keep him warm. But they are made to live out in these environments, and they can cope very well, and it's actually probably better for their longevity and all these things. All the benefits that we are looking to get out of it, they're naturally getting because they're living out in those environments. So unless you live on a tropical island where it's comfortable all the time or that kind of thing, then that wouldn't even be a thought, I guess. But not that we can do anything about it anyways, because we're not putting them in a cold plunge. Anyways, that rant's over. I just thought that was an interesting thing to think about when we're trying to cuddle our horses all the time. So, if you're interested in learning more, I will put the studies and a lot of the resources that I use for this episode in the notes. And then, if you want to learn more about Wim Hof, the book that I read is called The Wim Hof Method. He also has, I think, 2 or 3 other books. So, definitely check those out if you're interested in learning more about his breath work or his cold water therapy and for all those specific things that I had talked about. And if you have any experience with cold plunging or have found benefits for you or just anything, I would love to hear about it. I think that it's really interesting. And so maybe just leave a comment. I'm sure other people would love to hear it too on the post about this episode on Instagram. Or if you have any questions or things like that, feel free to DM me on Instagram. My DMs are always open. I love to talk to you all. So I will see you all next time.